Welcome to IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Don.
Coming at you live from San Francisco, California.
You're watching IT Pro TV.
All right, greetings everyone and welcome to another great episode of IT Pro TV. I'm your host, Daniel Lauer, and in today's episode we are back with more in our A+ series. That's right, the good old, what is it, 22901, right? Yeah, that's it. There it is. There's the nomenclature for you. And joining us back in the studio yet again to lend his expertise on that knowledge, our good friend, Mr. Wes Bryan. Wes, welcome back, man.
Hey, man, how's it going? Got to give you props, man. All the different episodes you host around here, you happen to keep some of those numbers rattling around in your brain. And you give me credit for acronyms.
And they pass me around to every different show.
Yeah, definitely. So props to you there. But absolutely, I'm doing great, and great to be here, as always, in the 22901, the one that Dan mentioned there. We are going to be looking at some of the peripherals that we can expand on our user experience, right? In past episodes, we had talked about the system unit and the motherboard and expanding the functionality of the computer itself, if you will, by adding expansion cards, right? Well, we can also expand our computing experience by making connections, external connections, back to the system unit and adding functionality that isn't normally built into the computer. And some of these are actually built in by today's standards. So let's go ahead and we're going to go through really just a series of the different types of peripherals, right? These external devices that make connections through a port on your machine. Some of the first ones they call out. And in fact, let me go ahead and kind of change gears here for a second before we just dive right into talking about a whole bunch of different types of peripherals. All right. One of the things I want you to understand for the exam, some more of the specifics, is what the device is performing. And what I mean by that, what functionality is it performing? And more specifically, is this an audio input type device, right? Is this an audio output device? Is this a video input or output device? Does this perform data input versus data output? So also know the direction of the communication as well, rather than just knowing the device itself, right? So for instance, if they ask you, what does a printer do, right, versus a keyboard? If you think about it, a keyboard is a data input device, right? It's how we interact with the computing system by sending, typing in commands, and that inputs the data that controls the computer essentially, right? Versus a printer. A printer is a text or image-based output device, right? It's how we get data out of the machine in some kind of printed media, right? So definitely pay attention to that through the various devices that we're going to talk about. And I'll also continue to mention them, if you will, as the, what kind of functionality the device is doing. All right, well, that lends us to the very first thing, and that is what is known as a mouse, right? Mouse, when we talk about mice, I guess if you will say, they've been in a computing environment for a very long time. In fact, I want to say this goes back to the 50s, where they were, some of the people, I want to say it was like DEC, Digital Equipment Corporation. I might have that wrong, but the original inventor of a mouse, basically, it was a wooden box with a couple of metal gears in it, if you will, and it used like plotter vector coordinates, right, to position a cursor, if you will, on the screen, right? The cursor is the little logical pointing device that we see where the mouse itself is the physical device, right? And there are a few different kinds over the years. One that's kind of gone by the wayside there is the mechanical mouse, if you will. And this is the one that would use like a little rubber ball bearing in the bottom of it to manipulate some rotating gears inside of it, and it would move up and down, left and right. And this is the one where you can actually unscrew the bottom of the mouse itself, pull off a cover, pull the bearing out, and you'd have to get in there and you have to clean those little actuator motors with like a Q-tip and maybe a little bit of alcohol because they collect dust, if you will. Thank goodness we really don't use too many of them, because when it comes to positioning of the cursor, they were good for the time, but we have more accurate ways of essentially interacting with our computer, especially when it comes to the cursor that you see on the screen. That being said, we're talking about, for instance, optical mouse. An optical mouse is one that uses an optical light source in order to track position. In fact, we've kind of got one here, and this is just a very basic mouse here. There's nothing fancy about it. I know some gamers would say, no, I wouldn't be caught dead with that type of thing, right? Because you can get very, very expensive mice here. But if you look, you can see that there is an optical laser source, and I don't know if this is going to work on my Mac. Probably should have tested this before we started here, but we'll give it a whirl and see if it powers up here. Yeah, there we go.
You blinded us all.
Oh, right. Now, you know, they
There's
say...
a warning right there.
That's right. You should always look into... No, kids,
Don't
we
do
were
that.
just kidding, right? But that's what's essentially happening, right? The mouse itself is actually manipulating the cursor here, and it's tracking the position. And what's kind of cool is as I'm doing this, I can see my cursor over there on the Mac kind of going crazy on me, right? But then you typically have, you know, the little center wheel there, right? And the roller wheel, if you will, controls things like page up, page down. It's a scrolling wheel, if you will. And you typically have some kind of left click and you have a right click. And depending on what you're doing on your computer and how you have the logical side of this configured will dictate which one these buttons do. You know, if you basic configuration, we say, what is it, left for select, right for effect, and that means basically right click gives you a series of options and left click typically selects whatever the object is, and then you can move the mouse around. And again, remember the optical light source, you can kind of see it kind of light up there, will control the position of the cursor on the screen relative to how you're moving it. There are other types as well. There's a couple of different optical light sources that they have today. They have what is known as a blue track mouse, and I believe it was Microsoft that first invented this, and all that's using is a blue optical source. And the thought process behind this is the fact that you have to be careful with an optical mouse because if it's on a reflective surface, it can mess with the calculations, right? The tracking of the system, because again, kind of like a mirror reflecting the optical light source, it might be reflecting it right back into the lens itself, and it can cause all kinds of squirrely problems. That's why we say, you know, that's the reason you have a mouse pad, right? The mouse pad, some people think, well, oh, the mouse pad is just for the old the rollerball mice because it would give a grip on it, give you a little more traction. That really isn't the case. Keep in mind that you know, it's more for today for the reflective surface. Now, I don't see this in the list. I do want to mention a couple, you know, another type of mouse-based type device. It's called a trackball. And a trackball essentially is the old mechanical rollerball mouse turned upside down. Me personally, I can't stand them. And one of the great things about them is you can leave the mouse, the base, if you will, in a single location, and you just use the roller ball that's on top of it to move the cursor back and forth. Some people swear by them. I know one of our hosts, Don, loves trackballs. Our owner and CEO, well, both of our you know, co-founder and founder there love the trackball. Personally, I can't stand it. I've never been able to get used to them. If you ask me to work on your computer and have a trackball, I'm going to go find a mouse and plug it into your computer so that I can work with it. However, they got a low latency, so they're very, very fast devices, and they have a real ultra-fine precision when it comes to really fine point placing the cursor. That being said, a few different types of connections you have to keep in mind. What you've seen here was a USB. And when we talk about a USB mouse, obviously making a USB-based connection, although you also have some of the earlier type connections. Those are the old PS2 ports with the 6-pin mini DIN, and you can see those for your keyboard, mouse, green and blue, or purple, excuse me. And also wireless communications. And keep in mind, we've got two types of wireless communications that they can use. They can use Wi-Fi communications. A lot of times they use Bluetooth as well, and they'll go through the pairing process. So also pay attention to the connection types that you have. Now, the next thing that we have are keyboards, all right? And keyboards, when we look at them, they come in all different shapes and sizes. And we got a couple of different kinds here because we really want to talk about, again, the connections that you could see on these. In fact, I've got a wired keyboard here, and we have, well, basically a wireless keyboard. And you can see that this one is going to be using essentially the USB connection, where this one, well, it's completely unbounded, right? It doesn't have any kind of tether type connection there. And you can see when it comes down to it, these keyboards, they have different bells and whistles in them. One of the common functions that they have a lot of times are the function keys across the top and the numeric keypad. You can see both of these have that function. That's actually a standard, believe it or not, that's kind of in our mindsets gone by the wayside, because in the earlier days, like going all the way back to the AT boards, that numerical keypad would have been directly connected right to the main keys on the keyboard, right? And that's one of the things that what's known as the AT enhanced standard came in later on as we progressed in the technology, and that's typically where you can see things like your home button here, and page up, page down, the directional keys, and then the numeric keypad separate from that. Again, I want you to know that for the exam. I know that's a little bit of a little technical specification there, but it could come up on the exam. What is the current standard? And it has been for a while. Now there are different types of standards even within that AT enhanced. And what I mean by that, if we can real quick go back to these keys, these keyboards, it's kind of hard to see on this one because this one's positioned right here, but you'll see if that is a Windows logo. There is a Windows type keyboard. It essentially is the AT enhanced board, but with the Windows key here. Now, Mac also follows, and Apple, if you will, also follows the AT enhanced in standard too, but theirs is a little bit different, right? Theirs obviously isn't going to be a window logo on any Mac device, right? It's the command button. So keep in mind that you have the command button where inside of Mac you might do, like for instance, Command C for copy, where you might do Control C on the regular Windows-based keyboard. So a couple of different types of keyboards that you have, and again, remember the communications that they have likewise too. Keep in mind you have a wired keyboard. The earlier wired keyboards were essentially the PS2 ports, and even going back farther than that's kind of interesting. They used to be called AT DIN standard because it was a 5-pin DIN that typically we use in things like microphones and audio communications now that we don't use in motherboards anymore. Moved into the PS2 ports, which were your 6-pin mini DINs, and then later on, because of the the commonality of USB, that became the very popular technology for a very long time. And now even today, like you see with that white one that is for the Mac-based devices made by Logitech, is essentially wireless Wi-Fi communication. Actually, these are Bluetooth, I believe. No,
this is wireless.
They are wireless.
Yeah.
That's right, because they use a little micro dongle, right? A little dongle that fits into a USB port. And again, you also have Bluetooth keyboards too. Which one you use is really up to you. Keep in mind that one of the things you always want to remember when it comes to your wireless keyboards, that they have batteries, right? We're actually kind of beneficial here. If we can go back to the keyboard here, I gotta kind of show this off. It's a really cool design that this actually uses solar power. You can see if I kind of do that these are actually solar panels right here. And if I turn this keyboard on and off, you can see the little green light right there, and that lets me know, it's a little happy face right there. It lets me know, oh, it's happy, it's got plenty of juice in it. If it, a little frowny face, it would let me know, hey, I got to keep this under the light. But the one great thing about that board there, or keyboard there, is the fact that it takes really little power to charge this thing. In fact, I don't know that I've ever charged. All the hosts here pretty much use them, unless the people are on Windows machines or using some other type of keyboard. I don't think we've ever had one of these keyboards where Dan, have you, where you've come in and said, hey, I got to charge it?
Nope, it keeps itself charged pretty well. There's an abundance of solar radiation, apparently.
That's right. We're all cooking ourselves here. We glow green by the end of the end of the working day. So, just kidding, guys and gals out there. But again, a couple of the different connection types that you have. Now, we've talked about in other episodes, we've talked about things like multifunctioning devices, and when we say multifunctioning devices, we're talking essentially a fax machine, printer, and scanner all built into one. They still have them out there today where we have flatbed scanners, and again, keep in mind that this is a device that will essentially take a photo identical copy of any kind of paper or any kind of media that you need to get a copy of, unlike a copy machine, which will do some kind of pixelation on it. And we've got an example of an older one here. Every one of the hosts around here typically has some kind of closet. We love IT so much that we've got a lot of components here, and we don't like to get rid of them. So what you can't see is this one is actually, in fact, we go back to it. This one actually is like the size of a barge. So this is a fairly old one, but the concept is the same regardless. They call it a flatbed scanner for obvious reasons. And then much like a printer, it's got a stepper motor. So if you look at the inkjet printers that we talk about, right, and the print head goes back and forth, if you will, well, this concept is really the same. It's got a stepper motor that pulls a lens down, and as that lens comes down, it's taking pictures, and the slower that it moves, the higher the resolution of the picture. However, keep in mind that a lot of this functionality we find today is built right into multifunctioning device, MFDs, if you will. Again, anytime you have some kind of multifunctioning device, though, I want you to keep in mind that the multifunctioning device is it'll do each one of those functionalities saves you money, right? More economical. You don't have to buy all of your devices, furniture, and then put them up in a room, right? Because again, you get space saving. However, single dedicated devices a lot of times will perform the functionality better than a device that's performing multiple functionalities at the same time. So that is, it is something to take into consideration. MFD, great, right? Love them. You can have them in your house. You don't have to have an entire desk just for all these peripheral devices. However, if you have a device that is dedicated to a single functionality, that means its sole existence is to perform nothing but that functionality that it brings to you. All right. Moving down the list, we have what are known as barcode readers. Barcode readers is a very simplistic method, or way, if you will, of encoding text and then scanning it with some kind of optical sensor, some photo sensor, if you will. They could be laser-based barcode scanners, could be some kind of optical scanner, right? With the prevalence of QR codes today, too. They could do it just through cameras today. They don't really need lasers as much, but you've probably seen them before if you've ever gone to any store and you've got maybe a piece of plywood at the, your Home Depot or whatever, and you're not going to scan that, if you will, across the optical sensor on the table. And they got a little handheld scanner. Thank you. Yeah, and they come out and they scan the UPC that's on the back of it. Again, you also have scanners out there as well today with QR or QC codes. Barcode scanner, keep in mind, is directly related to the laser scanner, if you will, that is scanning those barcodes or the UPC symbols that are on the back. We also have things like biometrics readers. When we talk about biometrics-based device, if you will, essentially what you're talking about is authentication. When we get into other episodes, we'll talk about security. We'll talk about biometrics as well as being a way that you can prove the identity of a user by using some physical or sociological characteristic, whether it's voice recognition. In this case, biometrics reader could be a thumbprint scanner. It's one of the most common ones that you have on your devices, even your handheld devices, like cell phones, if you will. Could be some kind of facial recognition type system. It could be built into a webcam, if you will, right there in your things like your laptops too. But again, keep in mind, a biometrics device is one of those devices that peripherals, it's all about security. And it can enhance the security of a system by using that physical characteristic of yourself that's typically relatively difficult to replace or to replicate, if you will. I'm not saying it's impossible, because as you'll go on and learn, Dan, I know you're well aware of, you never say never in security, because just when you think somebody can't do it, they'll prove you wrong for sure. All right, what else do we got as well? We've got gamepads. Gamepads, I remember when I first seen this, I said, gamepad, all right, well, we're going back to Nintendo. We're talking about the old gamepad that they had, but really we're talking about handheld controllers. If you have PlayStations out there, you have Xbox out there, any kind of, gaming system, you're talking about the gaming controllers, and yes, you can get those connected to your machines. And again, like we've talked about with any peripheral device, it can be a wired connection or it can be a wireless connection. Keep in mind that the wired connection, anytime you got a wired connection, a lot of times you get a faster speed. So you will see things like gamers that will sometimes won't use a wireless connection because they don't spend all the money on their devices, right, to get a good experience, just to have some kind of latency in the device. And sometimes that works for keyboards as well. Whereas a wired connection, you're using electromagnetic energy that's being injected right into the computer. So again, we're talking about less delay, if you will.
That's someone that's taking their gaming a bit serious.
Oh, yes, yeah. Well, you think about it. If I just spent $5,000 on my gaming rig and I can't get the headshot because I got to wait for an input.
Well, now that it's a business, that's amazing to me that when we were kids, that was a joke. Like, oh, here's the kid playing Nintendo again. And now people actually make a living playing video games. So.
And let me go ahead and stop. I'd like to expand on that idea because we ask what moves this industry. Mm-hmm. Two major contributing factors, corporations and gamers. Why? I have a PC sitting in my house that I've had for 8 years. I'm not the one that's supporting the PC industry right now, right? But gamers bought that PC, they spent all the money on that PC, and then something comes out that's new that blows that away. Guess what? They're going to buy it. Corporations have lifespans of around 3 years of expensive devices, maybe 5 at the max, and guess what they have to do? They have to buy something else. So they are really, and I'm glad you brought that up. It is. You couldn't be more correct on that in the fact that they're the ones that move the industry. Where we used to be just kids, grabbing our game consoles and taking them over to somebody's house and sitting around them for hours. But yeah, really, those are the two entities that really move the entire computing industry. It's that because they can afford to spend more and more money when it comes down to it. Now, we also have other types of things, other types of peripherals that they have to talk about. And speaking of gaming, that leads us right into the next one, Dan. So great timing. It looks like you have done this once or twice, sir. We've got a joystick right here, and just like the gaming pads and game pads, right, we talk about little controllers. So if we'll take a look at this is an oldie but goodie as well. In fact, this came from the same closet that the scanner did too. Now you remember.
It's got the same closet dust.
That's right. It sure does. You know what kind of game stick this is, right?
Yeah, it's a Sidewinder.
All right. So you can tell Dan is definitely has been a gamer now. I know when you have kids and a job, it kind of takes a back seat. But boy, there was a time when this was probably front and center in your life, right?
Oh man, it's a lot of fun. You know, you want to play games. Games are meant to be fun, and you want to enhance your experience. So the community realizes that, so they create a peripheral that will do that very thing. I mean, we've seen not only things like the Sidewinder here, but the race car controllers with full foot pedals and throttles, you name it. It can get a little ridiculous, to be honest with you. And if you've got the money to spend, they'll be more than happy to take it out of your wallet and give you something, well, it's very cool to slap in front of your computer.
Heck yeah. And, you know, and again, when, you know, 6 months from now, it's the old stuff, you're going to have to buy something new. So, again, it's one of those perpetual cycles, right, that just keeps going all over and over and over.
I was always the kind of person that bought the junk, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that's 2 generations old. Yeah, and it was $12 instead of the $140 that it was when it was brand new.
Right, just like going through college. What'd you eat? I didn't go out to a restaurant. I ate goldfish and Pop-Tarts for the next 4 years.
Half a ramen soup.
That's right. So yeah, keep in mind the connections have changed like this. Again, wireless connection, wired connections are very, very common for this, and it's not because they're outdated by any means, but again, you get a better functionality. I don't have to worry about the batteries dying in the middle of the game. You know, a couple other things that they talk about that I really don't have any examples here for. They talk about a digitizer. With the fact that touchscreens have become so prevalent today, digitizers are still out there. We still use them. And for a while, they were a real common way to interact with some kind of display, input display, right? A digitizer typically it's different than a stylus. It looks a lot like a stylus, but usually what it has is some kind of logic circuit board built in it. It looks like a pen, if you will, and a lot of times it has a driver. And again, that piece of software that allows your operating system to communicate with your hardware. And what you do is essentially you will press. Well, it could be capacitive touch or resistive touch. I've seen some of these digitizers that, like Eno boards, that's an interactive whiteboard, that the entire whiteboard, if you were to magnify it, you actually just take a magnifying glass up to it, you'd see it's nothing but one big, huge QR code. And what the digitizer does is it's got an optical pen, an optical point in it, and it actually takes a picture of where you are to track where you are communicating with that interactive whiteboard. It could be resistive touch, if you will. That's actually a series of resistive layers that when you press down onto it, it takes 2 metal films and presses them together, and that's how the input tracks where you are. So again, digitizers, you could have those as well. Commonly found in things like interactive whiteboards, as well as things like capacitive touch screens, and as well as resistive touch screens too. Motion sensors are exactly what they sound like. A lot of times your motion sensors could be a couple of different things. It could be infrared in the fact that it's tracking abrupt changes in heat patterns. A little bit different than, like, you might say, well, wait a second, what, if it's a motion sensor, how does it distinguish heat patterns from the sun? Well, the sun is very, very gradual, right? It doesn't come up immediately, even though sometimes, when we're tired, we think so. It doesn't come up immediately, so that's a very gradual change versus somebody walking in front of the sensor and it abruptly changes the heat signature. If you think about one of our favorite movies, I know, is Predator, right? Think about that abrupt change in the heat signature, and that's what it's detecting. Again, it could be acoustic wave, and again, it's sending out some kind of acoustic wave, not acoustic wave, I'm sorry, radio frequency wave, and just kind of like the ping system, sonar system that you would find inside of like military as well, is that it reflects that radio wave back to the sensor, and it detects that as well. So again, motion sensors are also something that we have to think about. Touchpads. All right. Well, there's a few different types of touchpads. In fact, I've got one that we use. Yeah, and Dan, you see here, we got an example of one, and most of the hosts, a lot of the hosts that are using Apple-based devices, we're using one of these touchpads. And again, this one's this is called a Magic Pad. Again, the Mac itself here, also both of our Macs have one. This is common in laptops, right? But I do want you to understand that we'll talk about laptop input devices a little bit different because we're talking about peripherals. versus an integrated device. Concept is the same. Conceptually, they're doing the same thing. Like if I was to press on this one, I could feel the same type of clicks that I could on this one as well. But you also have things like touchpads that are on point-of-sale systems. And that's another thing to keep in mind is that if you've ever, for instance, had to sign a receipt, right? You're using a stylus. You could see that those are also touchpads as well. Interacting, Logitech makes them too, as on point-of-sale systems likewise. All right, what else do we have here? We got some other things that we got to talk about. Well, we've got smart card readers. Smart card readers and external peripheral. A lot of times it's built into things like your laptops or your computers, the front face of the system unit as well. But if you don't have it, remember peripherals allow you to add functionality to your computing experience. So we can plug these in, like for instance, external USB devices, and we could slip those cards in there that would allow us to essentially read things like SD cards, if you will, read all different kinds, MMC, all the old MMC cards, likewise too, even earlier things like compact flash. So a lot of times what they are is they support multiple of these cards in a single device. So pay attention when you are considering whether you are going to buy one of those, what formats they support. You might see things like 24-in-1, right? It means one device supports 24 different type of card formats. So it might be a limiting factor, might be that decision that you make. All right, a handful of other ones, Dan. I know we got a laundry list here. Digital cameras, again, digital cameras, keep in mind what they allow you to do is to essentially take, if you don't have a smart card reader, you might, a lot of times you have some kind of wired connection that you can make into plugging the device into your computer, transferring the photos. And Dan, I know you're heavily into photography, transferring those photos from your car or your camera to your card. Now, I'm going to throw you off on this one, Dan. Will you say, because I know you take high definition or high resolution pictures, would you say it's more efficient to transfer over a smart card reader, or do you find a good camera will also give you the same speeds of the transfer?
Well, they use USB.
Okay.
So whatever the USB versus, and I think that smart card reading is USB 2.
It is.
So if you're using a USB 2 cable, or it would be the same. It would be the same. If you have USB 3 camera, different story, obviously. And now a lot of cameras have Wi-Fi built into them, so you can just connect wirelessly.
Interesting. See, you try to throw somebody a curveball and he knocks it out of the ballpark. I'm not playing baseball with you anymore. All right. So again, keep in mind you do have digital cameras. We're not going to get into promoting digital cameras. You want to ask what a good digital camera is? Ask it on our forums, and Dan can jump in there. He might give you some tips on that one. Other things that we have are webcams, and I actually got an example of a webcam here. We've got, and these are all different types, all different kinds, right? High definition resolution today. A lot of them are high definition. They can get very, very expensive. This one isn't too expensive.
This is the exact one we're using to shoot the show.
Yeah, not really, but if you think about it, and that kind of lends itself to things like, for instance, how expensive some of these webcams can get. I've seen some webcams, if you will, that were connected to high definition conferencing systems that were $8,000 just for the camera itself. Also pay attention to the connection. Yes, this is USB for the longest time, and some still swear by it, that FireWire does a much better job when it comes to high definition video. However, USB seems to be a little bit more prevalent within our system, so it is a commonality likewise. All right, so we've got the webcam. Last one, as far as our input devices, every one of these devices that we've been talking about, guys and gals out there, keep in mind is an input device. I said that I would mention that, and I mentioned it on the last one, so you have to keep that in mind. And that's camcorder, right? Camcorder, again, a lot of times you have digital video that you have to take, and, well, camcorders allow you to do that. A lot of times you'll see camcorders and things like can build it, like digital cameras and camcorders are all in the same thing, right? If I can take a high definition video, what's the difference between taking a snapshot of that high definition video, and you can have, again, a multifunctioning device likewise. All right, so output devices, real quick. Printers, right? It's printed media. We talked about printers in another episode. Speakers, it's an audio output device. And again, we've talked about things like your sound cards give you the surround sound. You might see things like 7-to-1, 5-to-1, and that's how many speakers you have typically to one subwoofer. So you keep in mind that type of configuration. And we also have display devices. We have an episode that goes heavily in display devices, but this is how we see the results of the input that we put within the systems. Now, some devices are both. Some devices are input and output, right? A touch screen. All right, a touch screen is like on an iPad. That's an example of an input-output device, right? I can input data by touching the screen, at the same time display the results of that data on that same very screen. we have things like KVMs. Now, when we talk about KVMs, if you're not familiar with this, I've actually got a picture pulled up of one on my computer here, and this is a Belkin, right? They come in all different shapes and sizes, and essentially what this allows you to do, you'll see this in a couple of different areas, right? You'll see this in tech workbenches as well as in your server closets, and I want you to think about bringing multiple computers into a tech company that's going to work on them, right? They don't want to have 15 monitors, 16 monitors stacked up with 16 keyboards, 16 mice all across their tech bench, where they can put one of these KVM, keyboard video mouse is where the name comes from, and they can plug a single monitor, a single mouse, and a single keyboard into the front of this, and they can plug all of the PCs or all the computers that they're working on into this single box, and with a button or a keyboard shortcut, they can flip between the different displays and control multiple computers through a single device. You also do this with servers. You'll have 1,000 servers in a server closet potentially. You don't want to have 1,000 monitors, 1,000 keyboard, 1,000 mice. So what they have is multiples of these KVMs, and then you connect to the KVM. Typically, you're already connected to the KVM with some kind of single keyboard, monitor, and mouse, and you can control every one of them. Last thing that a couple things that I want to talk about. There's also what's known as a top set box. Guys and gals, don't let this confuse you. A set-top box? Yeah. Yes, a set-top box. We'll get this right eventually, right? I'll put the carriage right, or the horse right in front of the carriage, or the carriage right in front of the horse. We'll figure it out eventually. That's right. The set-top box, guys, it's a cable box, right? Things like your, as well as TiVo boxes, if you will, satellite boxes. Thank you, absolutely. An example, DVRs is another one, great one as well that we need to, and they call them set-top boxes. Sitting on the TV set, right? On top of the TV set.
Aptly named.
Yeah, very good. It's almost like they knew what they were doing on that one. Last one I want to mention is a MIDI-enabled device. This essentially allows you to turn your computer into like a recording studio, right? You can take instruments, digitize the information, right, and send it into a computer. A lot of people do this when they're doing things like home recording, if you will, as well. So great thing, what is it? It's musical interface, digital interface, musical instrument, digital interface. Thank you. Wow, see, you got that acronym right, too.
We're musicians.
Yeah, very good. That's right. All right, ladies and gentlemen, like I said, I know it's a laundry list. Dan's now broke with all the things we've had to buy here with his credit card here, but
hey, hold on, what?
That's right. I should have told him prior to us starting. So guys and gals, again, keep in mind input devices, output devices, and then the handful at the end that we mentioned that kind of sit on both sides of the tracks. They can be input and output devices for your 901 exam.
All right, everyone. Well, it looks like I've got some business to take care of and some credit card transactions to get rid of. But Wes, we thank you for walking us through this. There's a multitude of peripheral devices that you might connect to your computer. We just want you to be familiar with the most common that you might run into out there as an A+ technician, understand how they connect, what they do, and how they work. That being said, it looks like we are out of time for this episode. We do thank you for watching. Signing off for IT Pro TV, I've been your host, Daniel Lowry.
And I'm Wes Bryan.
We'll see you next time.
Thank you for watching IT Pro TV.